Good evening, I'm Laurie Johnson. Welcome to Houston Public Media's web series, Political Perspectives. Every week I'll be joined by show commentators Aiyer and Brandon Rottinghaus to discuss all things political. Tonight we'll continue the conversation from red, white, and blue on the flooding issues in the Bayou City. So let's get started. Jay and Brandon, I want to first of all define some terms. Let's talk about a watershed, because that word gets thrown around a lot, that the watershed should be designed to handle this kind of flooding. What in the world is a watershed?
Well, previous by saying that my seventh grade science is not equipped to handle this kind of level of detail, but as I understand it, the watershed is basically a large environment where you've got a natural way to be able to absorb the runoff from rain and to be able to distribute it. It happens slowly here because the quality of the soil is very different than places where it's more porous and you can get more in there. And so basically it's a big sponge, right? That's job is to filter out all that rainwater. The issue is that, of course, there aren't enough left. And what happens is that as the city grows and as you've got more development, there's this process where those things disappear. And as a result, you've got the water having to go someplace, and there's only so many places that it can go. So we saw reports that say that from the 60s to about the present day, you've got 25% more concrete in the city. You've got hundreds of thousands more people who have moved here since then. You've got every day, right, every week, hundreds of thousands of people or who are considering moving, and hundreds, tens of thousands of people who actually move here, monthly. So there's a huge jump in the number of people, the amount of development, and all this is creating a serious problem of not having enough watershed to be able to naturally funnel this water. So
are we, I'm hearing a lot of people wanting to point the finger or lay the blame somewhere or figure out who is responsible. And, one of the things that comes up is, 18 inches of water fell in certain areas in a span of a few hours. No amount of flood mitigation, could have prevented flooding in those circumstances. So is the problem the volume of water, or is it the volume of concrete?
It's probably a little of both, right? So when I think we heard in the previous show, sort of the idea, or sort of debunking the idea that we're talking about flood prevention. We can't prevent floods. We are the Bayou City after all. We live in a place that's prone to flooding. It's really about mitigation. It's about trying to manage the process by which we have this sort of massive flooding that occurs and try to minimize as much as possible. So yes, we've got too much concrete. We've had too much development. And when we talked about earlier, or some of the development regulations aren't really well suited and well designed to deal with the issue, and that's a city and county problem. But we also have situations where we have to recognize we're going to have massive amounts of water poured on us by nature, and some of that might be because of sort of larger issues outside of our control, whether they're climate change related, whether they're just sort of atmospheric changes that have taken place. The whole notion of this being a 500 or 300 or 100 year occurrence, I think, is no longer applicable. We've had two in a span of 14 months. Theoretical 500-year floods twice in 14 months. So I think that needs to be sort of reevaluated. But the bottom line on it is that the problem has to be managed, and we've got to look for solutions to mitigate. Otherwise, this is going to be an annual occurrence, because the property losses and the loss for both in terms of human life and just suffering, and the economic impact is so dramatic that if we do nothing, the city just simply can't afford to do that.
So one of the things we hear is, we know from a funding perspective, a funding mechanism, there's only so much ability to do these projects, to fix this one portion of this bayou, to fix the drainage in this one neighborhood. We don't have money to fix the whole thing all at once. Is there a path to developing a regional plan and implementing that plan to solve some of these problems?
I think this is part of the design of the way that the mayor wants to control this, to talk about this new czar that he plans to appoint, is to be able to coordinate a bunch of these efforts, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of coordination except in the actual emergency, which is a good thing, but that's not the only part of it that needs to be fixed, and that is the actual planning ahead of things. And if you go to places like the Harris County flood district, the website talks specifically about how they don't control development. That's not their job. Why not, right? These are sort of the big questions that they ought to consider. So it's the coordination problem, I think, that's one issue. And the other issue is funding. So these are piecemeal efforts. This is the way that government often runs. You do one small project at a time, and then you fix the problem, and then you move on. And until there's a sort of sense that this is a kind of a regional problem as well as a countywide problem that needs to be addressed, it's nothing's going to happen. The funny thing is, we're talking about, where the rain falls and when. It's variable, and that's part of the uncertainty of weather. But the fact that some places flooded in the Memorial Memorial Day flooding that didn't flood now. Some places that flooded now didn't flood Memorial Day. It's this complete, stochastic sort of measure where we don't know what's going to happen. So this is part of the problem of needing to be able to have a kind of a bigger picture at work.
So we heard some comparisons to other areas in the region that somehow they've got it figured out, that maybe in Fort Bend County or Montgomery County, they don't have the widespread issues that Harris County has. But, the thought that comes to my mind is it fair to compare counties like that when Harris County is so dense, there is so much development, it's not the same as Fort Bend County?
Well, I think part of the problem is that Fort Bend County and Montgomery County both really developed in sort of much more structured, orderly ways, right? The city of Sugar Land is one of the most planned cities in, I think, the state of Texas, if not the country. The Woodlands is by definition sort of this master plan community out in Montgomery County, and those are the two big population centers in those counties. And the county regulations of both those counties really came into being with the idea of sort of measured, controlled growth, where they're dealing with issues of flooding, because they recognize that that's a problem. The issue in Harris County is considerably different. I mean, this is a city and a region that has really blossomed under the idea of a light hand when it comes to regulation. The problem, though, is that some of those regulations, or the lack of regulations, have led to kind of unfettered growth that clearly, if it hasn't caused some of the problems, is certainly not helping the situation. So we're building roads out into the unincorporated parts of Harris County, and then developers rush in to do it. Within the city, we're building large numbers of sort of mid-rise and multifamily. We're trying to create urban density, but we're not investing in the underlying infrastructure. So we're not widening roads or increasing more capacity for drainage. So we're doing all these things at the same time. So there needs to be some regulatory reform at the county level, within Harris County, both at the county level and at the city level. We need to have tighter regulations. We need to probably adopt and look at what's some of the things that are working in those other counties and incorporate them. We haven't, because pretty much we don't have much here. And it's fueled our growth, but it's also hurt us. And so the question is, if we don't do something, can we continue to sustain the growth we're doing, or we're going to see a lot more of these floods going on. So
is there going to be the political will then as a result of this? I mean, maybe outcries from the public forcing local politicians to, crack down on unmitigated development?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you've got two big events in a row that I think are going to force the hand of some of the public officials to make some tough choices. And we saw all of the public officials locally responding to this, and I think that's important. This city's always done this, and we've had big flood events that have happened historically, and that's always caused this kind of political change, and then the will has been found to make some big fixes. Whether it will be a comprehensive fix, we don't know. In 1853 was the first time that there was a huge flood in the city, and what ended up happening was that the bayou overflew, and they have all of downtown wiped out, followed by a yellow fever outbreak, followed by a fire.
Oh dear!
And finished the job, right? We don't have that kind of problem, but the kind of growth that we found that Jay was talking about is exactly symptomatic of this. After that, the city leaders got together and said, we need to find something that's going to make this solution, right? So crisis management is one thing, recovery is another, and so how they plan to recovery is going to be critical. One of the things I thought that was really interesting that I think it probably should be part of this, and that is a kind of neighborhood effect, where the neighborhood centers that are locally, and especially in the sort of north central part of the city, participated in the process of helping recovery, going door to door, talking to people, making sure people are okay, and helping the city kind of smooth some of the things out. I think this has to be done, because if there's one thing we know about how recovery happens after these disasters, it's that local investment is critical. You don't want the people leaving or to be permanently injured by the kind of things that can happen. So that kind of investment is really necessary. So it's a kind of a county-city partnership. It's also kind of a public-private partnership. So it has to be politically savvy and politically connected to what voters want. And so it all has to kind of meld together, and that's hard to do, right? And the problem is so expansive that it's tough to get that done.
And in this particular situation too, there's a lot of vulnerability. We've talked a lot about homeowners, homeowners flooded, having their homes flooded, having to pay for flood insurance. But we saw in this particular event, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of people displaced from multifamily housing, and much of it subsidized low-income housing. They're not going to have a backup option the way a homeowner does.
Absolutely right. I mean, we talk a lot about the flooding in Meyerland or in the northwest part that are basically family homes, but in the northeast part of the city, you saw a lot of multifamily, right in the Greens Point area. Many of those folks are renters. It's the only place they know. There's situations there. They're not going to be able to quickly access insurance, and so they're going to need a lot more assistance. But that's what makes this whole flooding, this particular crisis even more interesting, is it has covered the entire region. You've had situations, and there are 3 different parts of it, right? You've had the northwest part, that west part, which is really because of the development. You've got this Meyerland area that's because of the issues surrounding the expansion of Braze and how was it really done on a timely manner. And then now you've got this sort of isolated instance on the north side, which is because of some of the lack of things that were done for the city. And then you've got the recovery element. So we've got all these things moving forward, and the city and the county are going to have to come together in a way they haven't before. Otherwise, this will keep happening.
Well, we hope they will find some solutions soon. Thank you so much for joining us and watching the program. Remember to log on to houstonpublicmedia.org/perspectives every Friday night at 8 p.m. following the 7:30 broadcast of Red, White, and Blue. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.